Welcome to the It's Your Choice podcast, where we learn how to rewire our brains to live the life we desire. On with the show. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you, Sara, for joining us today. For everybody listening and watching, we have Sara Causey joining us.
Happy to be here.
Sara, what is your definition of intentional living?
That's a fantastic question. I think the word that really pops into my mind immediately would be authenticity, because I think you can't really have intentional living without being your authentic self. And there's so much, at least in my perception anyway, fakery these days, whether it's fake followers on social media or someone claiming that they're the number one in this or that industry. It's funny because I once heard a podcaster named David Bear talking about this exact topic. And he was discussing someone who claimed to be the number one coach in their industry. And as it turns out, the person was only the number one coach in their industry because the man had anointed himself with that title. And David admitted that there were times that he himself had written articles about himself in Success Magazine. And he was really doing this to pull the curtain back and say that sometimes we compare ourselves to other people and we think, oh, well, Joe is doing so great and Sally is so awesome. And then look at my life. And I think social media adds to that sense of FOMO, right? We look around and we're like, well, everybody else is doing great. And I feel like I'm on the struggle bus. What's up with this? But people are faking it sometimes. And so I think in order to live an intentional life, we also have to be our authentic self. And I would add to that the amount of fakery that goes on in the corporate world. And I find that this happens a lot with introverts and HSPs. And what I mean by that is not that those of us that fall into that category are fakes, but we have to put on a facade at work so often because the sort of neurotypical, extroverted Western world way of management is considered the way, the primo way of being. And when you don't fit in that mold, you feel this pressure to hide who you are. Or, oh, I've got to be sociable today. I have to be quote unquote on. And so it makes us uncomfortable at times. And I think that in order to have that intentional living, we have to be able to feel comfortable in our own skin and to live an authentic kind of life.
I completely agree with that. And I think at times, maybe I as myself, and because I don't want to say others, I don't want to be putting things on people, but I myself, and I'm sure others as well, why don't we even know what our authentic self is? Because we have that, like many people say we're always wearing masks, and some masks are a lot thicker, some are a lot thinner. Like I need to be that extroverted. I need to be camera ready, even though I'm like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, hey, everybody. And then once the camera's off, thank goodness. And and then I wonder, like those lines start to become blurred because we can change who we are. Um, Obviously, we shouldn't be changing our values or things like they should be true to us. And as we change, those things can change. But how do I really know who I authentically am when I have to be this caring person for my family? I need to be when I'm at work. I have to be strong and firm because that's what's needed for my industry. When I'm with my girlfriends, I can be this way. And I'm not saying that we're faking and all of those things. Even when I'm hanging out with my friends, if I don't really want to do something and they all want to go, I'll be like, oh, yeah, that's great. I'll go. And inside, I'm kind of like, I don't really want to do that,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that the analogy of a mask is really well said. You know, there's a proverb that everyone has three masks. There's the mask that you'll show to anybody out in the general public. There's a mask that you only show to close friends and family members, maybe your spouse or your bestie. And then there's the ultra private face that you only ever show to yourself. Not even husband, wife, domestic partner gets to see that side of you. And I think that the more that we feel comfortable being in that space, that private face space where we can show maybe not the whole enchilada, but we can show more of it than we're not showing, then we can get into intentional, authentic living because it's awfully exhausting. I mean, even just the analogies that we're talking about, being in a workplace where I always in my life compared it to being a left foot stuck in a right shoe. I could walk, but it really was painful and it was uncomfortable. And I didn't feel like I could go as far as fast as if I had been a left foot and a left shoe and everything had just fallen into place. So I think being able to feel
Mm.
comfortable in your own skin and to feel psychologically safe. I know that that's become an important sort of buzz phrase in today's world, but it's not just a throwaway DEI phrase. It really has meaning. In order for people to express themselves in a classroom, in a workroom, or even on an interview like this, you have to create some amount of psychological safety. Otherwise, people will just sort of tense up and they won't say what they're really thinking. Well, in the work world, how will you ever solve a problem? How will you ever remove a bottleneck if the workers who know what's going on are afraid to say anything because the boss might fire them, or they might be reprimanded, or they might, the next time that pink slips are going out, they're going to be on the chopping block because they had the nerve to question the system. So I think the more that we're able to show some of those private elements of ourselves and not feel that we're always in a cocoon or we're always wearing a mask, it just gets, in my opinion anyway, and in my experience from my corporate days, it gets awfully exhausting if all the time you're faking it and all the time you feel that who you are as a person is somehow wrong.
I agree. I think that is well said. And to know that we all do have masks, and when it is kind of necessary, because there are times that, we got to kind of suck it up and push through and do something that we don't want to do or we don't like, or things like that. And that's part of life. But I think too, we also need to be able to say no more,
Yeah.
and just not do some things, or not like, and no can be that boundary, whether it is a work boundary, a family, kids, whatever it may be, and knowing that we need certain things. We have to do what things that we enjoy doing sometimes. I was just talking to a friend the other day, and she was feeling really down and really depressed, and stuff, for a variety of reasons. And individually, you're kind of like, okay, that's not that bad, and that's not that. But when you start putting them together, I'm like, okay, all of that makes sense. And then I said to her, I said, but when was the last time you met up with some of your friends? When was the last time you went to the gym? When was the last time? And she's like, well, it's been a while. And I said, that's what you need to do. Like,
Yeah.
we and everybody's a little bit different, because I have some friends that are very introverted and really don't like to be going out very much at all, but
Mm-hmm.
they also know that they need to sometimes. And she's somewhat introverted, but she's working at home, and she just was previously on a long trip and around people full time for a month. And so she went from
Mm.
full time around people, like I think there was 19 of them or something like that, 20 of them,
Oh,
whatever the
wow.
number was. So, and then to just being all day by herself again. And it was like, well, that's an adjustment, because you were around so many people and this. So now you need to go see people. You need to be
Mm-hmm.
out and around people, and then come back home, and find that balance for her, because before she went on the trip, she was doing great. I mean, but she was still going out and doing stuff. So she wasn't always alone, and then always with people, and now overwhelmed with everything, just completely alone. I'm like, well, that's swinging too far
Yeah.
of the differences, where we need to find more of whatever that balance works for us.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I'm about to break out in hives just at the idea of being in a 20-person group for a month. I think that I would probably lose my marbles, but I get what you're saying because, and I think that when we have a cause outside of ourselves, sometimes that oomph, that chutzpah, that fire can motivate us to get out of the comfort zone. That has definitely happened for me in recent weeks, really in recent months, because when I started writing my book, I needed to conduct research. I mean, there were times that there was one morning in particular, I remember I had called the UN and the CBS headquarters all in the same morning. And I was like, look at me. Look at who the heck I am today. Wow. I just feel like I am full of moxie and fire. And then in terms of promoting the book as well, there's a sense of if you build it, they will come. If you release an incredible work and you feel great about it, other people will find it. Yeah, but also no. You still are going to have to put it in their path so they can find it. And when you have that mission, you feel like there's something beyond me that I want to talk about. Because I think sometimes, I mean, speaking for myself as an INFJ, I'm an idealist and, I can get super passionate about something, but then I can also stay cloistered away in my protective introvert space where I'm like, hey, everything's safe here. And I don't have to deal with bad news and I don't have to deal with, the latest breaking news, sad, awful tragedy that we see on CNN or on Fox all the time, where you're like, oh God, I'm so worn down from all of this. When we're doing something outside of ourselves, it's sort of like, I needed this push. I needed this extra something so that I can say, I don't want my comfort zone to get too small. It's like how Susan Jeffers talked about that in her landmark book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. If we allow our comfort zone to just stay small, then what happens is over the course of time, it just contracts down smaller and smaller and smaller. You really have to make some kind of effort to say, I want my comfort zone to get bigger and bigger. I don't want to be on my deathbed thinking about all the things I didn't do because I was scared or because I thought someone would criticize me. Like at some point, you just have to say, I want to get bigger. I want my goals and my hopes and dreams to get bigger. I want the comfort zone to get bigger so that things that used to seem really freaky and scary, now they just don't. And I'm okay. I went on a podcast or I called the UN or I did this and that and I lived. Wild lions didn't come out of the trees and kill me. I'm still here and I'm still kicking.
Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know about the Mind Matters weekly newsletter that is full of actionable tips to help you rewire your brain to live the life that you desire. Sign up for it at sallypeterson.com. And when you do, you'll get the top 5 brain hacks for peak performance. Again, you can get it at sallypeterson.com. Now back to the show. It's so true, and I mean, it really is, like, I understand that the brain is there to protect us, and even though how advanced to a degree our brain is, it's not as advanced as we have advanced as human beings with everything, and so it still is that protect from the unknown, protect, like, we need to survive, and so even though this is a crappy or bad situation, we know what to expect, we can handle it,
Yeah.
it's okay, don't change, don't go out there because what if bad,
Hmm.
danger, and it's always bad. It's never, what if it's amazing and wonderful and
Hmm.
good?
Yes.
And so it is incredible how, and I get it to a degree because our brain wants to protect us. But if we think of a lot of things, of course, there's been people that have done some crazy things and it has been very dangerous. But all the things that we think about, whether it is going on that podcast, making those phone calls, um, auditioning for something, writing a book, like those things aren't going to kill us,
Right. Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah, that's so
the
true.
worst case scenario is it doesn't work out. I made a fool of myself on the podcast, and then I messaged them right away and be like, you know what, please don't use this. Like I really don't want you to use it. And they can decide, it's their podcast, if they think it was good or not, because sometimes we may think it was terrible and the person was like, no, this was great, it was really good. And again, it's just our self worrying about it. And then when we think about it, as you said, you don't want to be on your deathbed having those regrets that I didn't try, I didn't do it, because after we're gone, some people will miss us, those
Right.
people will eventually pass as well, and then nobody even thinks about us or knows us because, and I mean, that doesn't even take that long. If we think,
Yeah.
a lot of us don't even know our great grandparents. We
Right.
a good number of us never met them. Some people have, and they were lucky enough that they may have. The majority of people have never even met their great grandparents, so they don't know what kind of quote stupid things that they did when they were growing up
Hmm.
or adults or anything because
Hmm.
they don't know. Maybe they might hear some stories that probably weren't so accurate because they change over time, but really, who cares? And I know it's easier
Hmm.
said than done because I have those issues too, and I'm like, "Oh gosh." And then I have to go through that, and I tell myself, I'm like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm not going to die from it. The worst thing is it won't work. I'll learn some things. Maybe I'll learn not to do it again and move on. And nobody who is successful doesn't have more mistakes,
Oh,
or
yeah.
I just don't like the word failures. They don't have more mistakes or things that don't work out than they do things that do work out.
Oh, I agree 100% because there has to be some amount of risk tolerance, whether you're talking about entrepreneurship, you're talking about you want to live as an expat and go to another country, or you even just more basic life transitions, getting engaged, getting married, having a child, or filing for divorce if it's
Mm.
not working anymore. There are all sorts of life events that we tend to take for granted. We think, oh, well, people get married every day, people file for divorce every day, babies are born every day, but it's like you're still taking a leap of faith. You're still saying, I have enough trust in the future and enough trust that my judgment is sound about this event that I'm willing to go through with it. And I think honestly, that ties back to your first question about intentional living. Knowledge of the self is so incredibly important. And it strikes me as a tragedy that we have people that never take that time. If you were to say, well, how often do you meditate, or how often do you consider, why am I feeling this way? Let's break it down. I know that I'm mad about this. Why? Or I know that I'm feeling put out. She didn't invite me to that party, or he didn't give me good feedback. And it's really irking me, maybe more than it should. Why is that? Some people never go beyond the surface. They just sort of stay on the whatever the surface level emotion is, and they don't probe. But to me, and this is something really that I learned from Dag Hammarskjöld, is that knowledge of the self leads to a better knowledge of other people. It leads to a better knowledge of the human condition. Because if I feel nervous about something, somebody else probably has too. If I feel angry, somebody else probably has too. And it helps you to understand that you're part of this great tapestry. You're part of this great fabric of humanity. And I think this is another part of, if we stay in our cloister for too long, even if it's comfortable, we have our snacks and our nice recliner and our Netflix and all that, and everything's very groovy in our cocoon. Like, we can start to get disconnected from that tapestry, disconnected from the collective. And then when we tap back into it, it's like, oh, I don't have to be at like a loud raucous party. There doesn't have to be crazy music and loud sounds that are going to like trigger my HSP feelings. Like, I can be in a quiet environment. I could maybe go to a book club, or I could hang out in a coffee shop and commune with somebody else, and like, it's like a deep breath of fresh air after you've been cooped up, and I just think that that knowledge of the self and the knowledge of others is so critical for being able to live authentically and intentionally as yourself, and then to see that you're part of this bigger tapestry. I think it was Yeats that called it the spiritus mundi, and Jung who called it the collective unconscious. Like, I personally believe those things are real, and we tap into them, we see like, oh, I'm not so alone after all.
It's funny how, in a way, we think we're the only one. Like,
Yeah.
I'm the only one who feels this way. Similar to what you said earlier, is we see stuff on social media. I'm hopeful that we are getting better realizing a lot of it is fake and a lot of it
Yeah.
is perceived. And somebody, yes, may seem happy or they're having a happy moment. They're not showing all the crap that they're going through. Like a friend of mine posted a while ago. It was funny because she posts stuff on Facebook about her family and things, and they're cute and good things. And then she made a post and she's like, I usually don't post like this, but this is real life. And it was her kid just having a full-on meltdown of just like freak out meltdown. And she's like, yeah, this is reality. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
finally, and I know that because I'm a parent. I have a daughter. I mean, she's an adult now, but I remember her having temper tantrums in the middle of, a public place, and I'm just like, are you done yet? Because what am I gonna do? Right. And you get the looks of people. It's like, you're not a parent, you don't know. Oh, you get it. Yeah, I can tell you're like, been
Mm-hmm.
there. And people understand reality, but social media a lot has made things everybody's life perceived to be better than what it is, or at least better at the moment. And
Right.
I'm hopeful that people are noticing and recognizing that more. because we need to, because it's not the way it is. And yeah, you could smile and take a picture and then be depressed and start crying 5 minutes later. And so knowing that kind of intentional self of like, what is important to me? What matters to me? What do I want to feed myself? Because if I know a lot of the
Yeah.
social media is not true, it doesn't mean I don't have to go on social or that I shouldn't go on social media. I just need to be more aware of what am I looking at? Who am I following? What am I liking? What am I commenting on? Because those things I'm going to get more of. So as we have to kind of go internally with ourselves, we also have to be aware of the outer world and what we're allowing in and almost training the algorithm as best we kind of can to give us the things that bring us fulfillment, bring us happiness, make us laugh and kind of bring goodness to us, not letting it unintentionally go down the rabbit hole. Because when we're in those negative moments, if we're looking at social media and we're going more to the negative, we don't realize that the ripple effect to that is we're going to get more of that next
Yeah.
negative over the next 3, 5, 7, 10, I don't know how many days before we start getting more positive and liking more positive and kind of having to retrain it again.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and you said it all right there. That's applicable not only to social media, but I'm thinking about a person's mental state. You know, there's this component in the brain called the reticular activation system. And it's like how if you are interested, let's say, in buying a red SUV, suddenly when you're out on the road, you see red SUVs of that make and model everywhere. If you're interested in buying a new house, suddenly it's like realtor.com is everywhere. There are all these things like, oh, new house, new house, new house, red SUV, red SUV. And it's a matter
Mhm.
of focus, right? It's like what we focus on expands, or the old school rule that thoughts become things, because anything that's in being now started as an idea in someone's head. And so I think it also transcends social media. If we're just looking at fakery and braggadocio, oh my God. I mean, whether we're talking about in the political system or whether we're talking about in corporate America, there is just so much like bloviating and braggadocio and look at me. I did this. I carried this project. I passed that bill. I lobbied for that. And I think when we focus on these sort of negative things, we focus on volume. This is something I definitely see, like from a leadership perspective, is that sometimes people avoid getting into a leadership role because they say, I don't want to be loud. I'm a humble person. I don't want to be somebody that acts like jazz hands. Look at me. I'm the focus. It was all me. And so they avoid getting into a management role at work, or they avoid running for some kind of political office because they just assume, like, oh God, it's such a cesspool. Why would I even want to put myself in there? It's like, ugh. But we have to think about ways to make the world a better place. And I really think that that also comes exactly like what you're saying. If you interact with a lot of fakery and nonsense on social media, the algorithm is going to be like, oh, you like this? Okay, great. Let me dump it on you and buy the truckload. And same thing with what we're focusing on just out in the real world offline. If we're focusing on the negative, we're focusing on the loud, we're focusing on things that are meant to like hack into that lizard part of the brain, the breaking news and the loud noises and the, what is it now? You're going to get more of that. And you're also, I think, going to get really fried at the edges because you cannot live in that fight, flight, or freeze state. Like the human body was not meant to be in that high anxiety state for long periods of time. It was, we've
Mhm.
talked about how society has evolved, but maybe the brain hasn't so much. Like, okay, if someone was being chased by, I don't know, a saber-toothed tiger or a mastodon, it would make sense to be like, I better get out of here. But we don't
Yeah,
have
go
those
go
types of
now.
events.
Yeah.
Yeah, go now,
And
go
then
now.
but then that chasing stops, right? Or it gets us and then it's but generally if it's when we think of the wilderness too, like a deer, it's eating, all of a sudden something comes, it runs, it gets away, thankfully. And then it just goes back to grazing again. It's now calm, right? And if we were chased back in the day, we survived it and then the fear is gone and we're back to, oh, it's okay. But as you
Yeah.
said, we're almost not even getting that now.
I know it's like we're just so fried at the edges that we stay in that like mode for long periods of time. And I think it leads not only to a diminished quality of life emotionally and spiritually, but physically too. And I like to tell people that I'm a recovering type A because I used to live on that burning the candle at both ends. Nothing's ever good enough. I'm never good enough. I have to be and everything is urgent. Everything is hyper urgent. Everything needs to be as close to perfect as possible, and it needs to happen now, right now. And as you said, if the gazelle is out on the plain and it's being chased by the lion, then yes, the gazelle needs to go now to avoid being dinner. But after the lion is gone, the gazelle needs to just cool it. And it does. But as human beings, we have the
Mhm.
tendency to be like, no, the lion is still there, even hours after it's happened. So, I mean, it's just in my mind, it's not a healthy way to live emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, or even physically.
It really isn't. I mean, it does damage to us in all of those ways. And a lot of things, and science is starting to back more of it up when we prove, like when people end up going into the hospital or they have illnesses,
Yeah,
part of it is because of their stress levels, their mental state, um, diet and exercise has to do with it too. And all of them kind of though they snowball together. And because if, we're stressed all the time and then so we're not sleeping, so we're stressed and we're tired. So, I'm not going to go to the gym today. Oh, I'm really tired. So I'm going to drink some extra coffee or have more sugar because I need that energy boost. And then so I drank too much coffee and now I can't sleep. And I mean, it just
right.
becomes that never ending hamster wheel. And it's hard to do the things that need to be done to kind of break that. And for everybody, it's going to be different depending upon where they're at and what they're doing. But what do you think would be some of the easiest steps to start kind of breaking that cycle and to get back to our own energy, our intentional living? What for people that they're on that wheel right now and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I know I need to get off it, but I just how do I start? Where do I start that's manageable?" Because we could say, "Oh, a number of things," but it's like, okay, it's like the New Year's resolution. I'm going to do all these 10 things this year and yeah, 2 weeks
Right.
later it's over.
Yes, well, and that's very well said. We do have the tendency, I think, in the Western world, especially, that we want all the things and we want all the things now. And it's like, okay, but wait a minute. You
Mm.
sustainable change is usually easier if we dole the things out in bite-sized pieces so that we can acclimate to them, we can integrate them, and then we can say, okay, I mastered that step. It's like you wouldn't look at a very tall staircase and say, I'm at the bottom of this staircase right now. I need to get to the top, so I'm on the next floor. I think I will try to find a way to catapult myself up the entire staircase and possibly break my legs and ribs in the process. No, of course not. You would just take the steps one stair at a time and go on with your life. I'm reminded of a coaching client that I had several years back, and he was talking about how he was angry all the time. He would just like he would get to work and he would have a white knuckle grip on the steering wheel. And he was just pessimistic a lot, and he wanted to start changing his mindset. So I started asking him, what do you do at night before you go to bed? And then what do you do first thing in the morning? Let's start talking about your routines outside of work. What's going on day in and day out? He had like a radio or a television that had like a wake up alarm, and it was set to talk radio. And then he turned on the news on the television. And then he listened to talk radio all the way to work. And then after work, he listened to talk radio all the way home. And then he turned on cable news. And then he listened to, I mean, it was just news, 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 news. And I was like,
It's just
do you think maybe that getting a constant diet of the bad news and the breaking news and the world is going to hell in a handbasket, do you think maybe there's a connection there between feeling pessimistic and really ticked off by the time you even get to work? Do you think maybe there's a connection to all of that? And so that was one of the things that we worked through. Another was he was a coffee addict. And like for me, don't get me wrong, I love the taste of coffee. I drank coffee for years, but post COVID, I wound up with a heart arrhythmia. And so I cannot have caffeine anymore. And it has been life changing. Not being on caffeine and not having that jolt of like adrenaline coming through in the morning, it's been fabulous. So I'm kind of loving being decaffeinated. So sometimes there are very small almost microscopic steps that we can take to get off the hamster wheel. But those are two things that I say automatically. If you are downing energy drinks, you're using a lot of coffee, or you're
Those are
taking
bad.
caffeine pills, you have to be so careful with that, for one thing, for your heart health, but mental health, it's not good. And if you're just constantly news, that stuff is hardwired to get your attention. And it's also hardwired to make you angry, because good news doesn't sell. As we're like the old journalistic phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. So these networks and these radio stations, they are attuned, no pun intended, to the reality that if they scare you half to death, or if they create a scenario, right, of here's the one and here's the other, left and right, donkey, elephant, red, blue, I have to hate you, I have to hate you. Well, they're fomenting that, like, tension and vitriol, and it gets ratings. It makes money for them, but it doesn't do anything positive for you as an individual. So I think even just those two things, taking a massive step back from mainstream media and looking at your morning and evening routines, especially if you're addicted to energy drinks, if you're addicted to caffeine, it's exactly what you said also a few minutes ago. You imbibe all of that caffeine, and then you have difficulty sleeping. So you're probably on a sleep aid, and then you wake up and you're groggy. And so then you're taking more caffeine, and it really just puts you on a cycle of not obeying the body's circadian rhythm and not being able to listen to your own body cues about feeling tired at night and then ready to wake up in the morning. Even just those two simple things of really being careful about news consumption and caffeine and stimulant consumption, that can make a world of difference. Just those two simple things.
Pardon the interruption. If you're liking the show so far, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. It really means a lot to me. It helps grow the show and the channel and to the show. I agree. And I'm not a big coffee drinker. I generally have one a day, and it's more just it's a habit after I eat. After living in Europe for so long, they have when we
Yeah.
have lunch, after lunch you have
Mhm.
coffee or dessert, and I'm not a big dessert person, so I would just have coffee. And so it just became more of the habit of I have lunch, then I'll have coffee, but I never have it after 3 p.m. Like
Yeah.
that's my and I don't know if it really I'm just assuming because it will affect my sleep, but I don't have it after 3 p.m. so I don't have a problem sleeping. And I like to keep it that way. And yeah, I don't wake up in the morning going, "Oh, I need coffee to wake up," or things like that. So I agree with that. And I do have a TV in my apartment. I've never turned it on.
Yeah.
I'm not, and I said my mom used to, so she recently passed away, but she would
Mm.
watch always the news. Oh, and it would be like morning news, afternoon news, and I'd be like, Mom, come on. Like it's the same stuff that they played earlier today, and it's the same as yesterday. You could watch Monday, Wednesday, Friday, either morning or at evening. Like just pick
Right.
one, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you know what's going on in the world because even
Yes.
Wednesday they're talking about Monday stuff. Friday there are also stuff that they talked about Wednesday. I'm like, it's the same, very rare. And if something really big is happening, you'll kind of hear it through the grapevine like from other
Mhm.
people or whatever. You don't like get rid of the most of it. I mean, I still like to know what's going on in the world. And of course, I've got my phone. And so I'll read some headlines. And then I laugh at some of them because I know it's like,
Yes.
okay, somebody just said that because they want that attention, especially when it comes to politics. I'm going to do this, you're going to do that. This person did
Yes.
this or they've done that and this. And it's like, okay, yes, they may have said it, but I know how things are taken out of context. Did they
Mhm.
really do that? Or is that just how you're trying, and I know that. So I'm just like, I know it's all for it. And so I won't. And even when I read even stuff now that's still going on with the different wars that are going on, I look
Yeah.
at it and I'm like, who wrote that article? Where are they
Hmm.
from? Like, what country
Right.
are they from? Because especially being in Europe, I read stuff from North America. I read European news. I read some stuff that's like in English in Asia, different countries and things. And I look at where it comes from because it's very interesting. And people say it's so funny. People in the United States in a way, they're like, and I'm like, you're getting US propaganda. They're like, we don't get
Oh yeah.
propaganda. Like, you do. And they're like
Yeah.
they got mad at me. They're like, no, Russia gets propaganda and China gets propaganda. And I said, yes, they do. And I said, at least they know it. Like they
Right.
know they're getting it. North America gets propaganda. Europeans get European propaganda. Like everybody does. It's just some people are more aware of it and know, like each country needs to be doing the best and want their people to think that it's the best. And so when I look at things, it's always, okay, this isn't full truth. Sometimes completely intentional, not full truth. Sometimes
Oh
there's
yes.
just mistakes because they just don't have the information. And so we need to kind of just skim over highlights, maybe some titles, and be like, oh, okay, this is kind of what's going on in the world. Great. I don't need to read the whole article. I don't need to click on it because a lot of it's going to be misleading. And then it comes back to then, how do I want to live? What do I want to do? Who do I want to
Right. Oh
follow?
yes.
Who do I want do things that I resonate with, that I agree with how they live, the lifestyle they have, and what do I want to bring to me? What do I want to have for friends around, people around me?
Hmm. I agree. And it reminds me of this old interview I saw where Bob Proctor was being interviewed. I don't know, probably in the sometime in the 1980s. And the interviewer was really trying to trip him up. And he was like, so do you just not read the newspaper? Do you just not know what's going on in the world? And Bob said, no, I read the newspaper. I'm have an awareness of what's going on in the world. I just choose which stories I want to get emotionally involved with and which ones I don't. And I sat back and I thought, God, that is such an awesome way of framing it. I choose which stories I want to get emotionally involved with and which ones I don't. I think too many times people become emotionally entangled with stories that, as you say, they're just propaganda. It's slanted in a particular direction to make somebody mad or to get them into American exceptionalism or Western world exceptionalism, us versus them, this one's bad and we're good. And it's like, I just, my life is a lot easier and it flows a lot better when I choose to not become emotionally involved with those types of stories.
Right. And for the most part, there's nothing we can do about it anyway.
Right.
And even like even to a different level where I laugh sometimes at people who are the extreme sports fan and their
Hmm.
team is like their team. And I mean, when their team wins, they're like, woohoo, we won and all great. And when the team loses, they lost. They're terrible. And they get depressed and sad. And I say to them, it's entertainment. It's
Yeah.
just like it has zero effect on your life. And unless you're a bettor and you bet a ton of money and you're
Right.
gambling, okay, then there's an effect. But whether they win or lose makes no difference. It's even people who follow celebrities. I don't care what they're
Yeah.
doing or whatever, because I want to focus on what I'm doing and who I'm spending my time with doing the things that I enjoy, because what they do has zero effect on my life. So I'm not allowing that craziness, whatever, in. Now, if it's somebody who's like Bob Proctor, as you mentioned, I watch videos of him because I think they're informative and intelligent and
Hmm.
good. I am a huge fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I'm going to
Yes.
see him
Hmm.
in March. I'm very excited about that.
Awesome.
But those are, yeah, those are the things that I resonate with or I choose to be in. And so I personally want things that are going to teach me, where I learn, where I'm interested, go through phases of following and watching people and then not for a while, then maybe coming back again. Um, but those are the things that are important. I think that's what people need to kind of look at is what are they interested in? What do they like to do? And then find those YouTube channels, those people, but then also find like real people. If
Yeah.
you like writing, find a writing club. If you like books, find a book club. If you like hiking, which is great, I think we all need to spend time outdoors in nature, find a hiking group. And even if you meet up once a month, at least
Hmm.
you're still doing something you enjoy doing, you're connecting with other people, you're building friendships and the ripple effects. I think people don't realize the ripple effect of, you know, that negative article compared to that positive video YouTube clip. Like the negative ripple effects keep going for a long time, just as positive ripple effects will as well. And so even though you might think, oh, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't affect me. And it used to be something my mom would say. She would watch like awful TV shows, like about murder and rape and
Oh,
criminal and whatever. And I'm like, Mom, you got to stop watching that stuff. She's like, oh, it doesn't bother me. I'm like, it does, though. You just don't realize at that cellular energetic level, it does. And then so she changed the channel to watch plane crashes. And I'm like, geez, Mom. And
oh,
I'm like, I travel all the time. I'm on planes often. Like, I don't want to be watching. Like, once in a while, fine, if you're interested in true crime and maybe that's part of your job, your career, whatever, but that's still going to have effects on on you and how you think. And so I I think people just aren't so aware of how that energy of the things that we see, hear, and consume, music, books, videos, all of that really does play an effect on our body.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, I can, it makes me think of my grandmother because she is also a true crime addict. And she says the same thing. Well, it doesn't affect me. Like I can sit down and watch 5 hours of murder documentaries and it's no big deal. But then at the same time, she's super paranoid. If somebody turns around in the driveway or there's a car in the neighborhood that's unfamiliar, she's convinced that it's a murderer. And it's like, well, that's because you're watching murder all the time.
Right? Yeah, like I don't even like to watch scary movies because then I'll be like, what's that sound? Like, it just I don't really like I've never thought that I was a sensitive type person, but I have realized for probably about 2 decades ago when I really noticed it that when I watch something on TV, whether it's a scary show or like those type of murder shows, true crime type things, that usually within about a 2 week span I have some crazy messed up dreams that
Yeah.
somehow relate, like not fully, but there's bits of whatever I saw and watched or whatever that it's in there. It's in my head somewhere and I will have some type of weird dream. And when I started to recognize that, I was like, I don't like to watch that stuff anymore. And I do find that sometimes it is fascinating and interesting and people are weird because they do crazy things, but I'm just like, no, I need to protect I'm not as interested in it as much as I know how important it is to protect my energy, my thoughts, and my direction of where I want to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that that really comes back to intentional living, saying I'm going to curate what I consume. It doesn't feel good to me to consume a lot of caffeine. It doesn't feel good to me to watch murder shows 24 hours a day. It doesn't feel good to me to interact with fakey fake social media posts and just saying like I want to be careful about what comes into my orbit. Now, I can't control everything, as I shared with you earlier before we started recording.
Mhm.
Had a power outage this morning, and I was like, "Oh no!" Of all the times, I can't control the weather. I can't control thunderstorms and power outages, especially our January thunderstorm. It's like, okay, the Midwest is a crazy place, but I can control things like not watching murder documentaries every 5 minutes and not going on social media and not turning on the breaking news. So there are things that we can't control. That's true, but there are things that we can. And I think part of intentional living is about making those choices to really curate a life where you can say, I feel happy in my own skin and I feel safe and good in my own environment.
Absolutely. And I think just one little thing to add with that too is though even though we can't control what happens in some situations, like exactly today of the power going out and things like that, we can control how we respond to it. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying no, we're never going to get angry, we're never going to get upset because we are. I do like I get angry and things like that. But then it's sometimes it's how long am I staying angry? And then why am I angry? If there's nothing I can do about it, it's like, oh,
Right.
I'm mad. And even the other day my internet wasn't working. I was like, I was just there. I don't want to have to go back. And then I'm just like, okay, just let's just take a step back for a second. Let's see, let's do a few things and check and it came back on very shortly, but it's not that we're never going to be angry or upset or worried, but we can't control some things, but how we respond and react. And I don't want to be angry all the time. I don't want to be,
Yeah.
like I struggle sometimes, I think, with like I just don't trust people. I think there's, because we hear so much about the negative, I'm like, but I know there's so many good, great people in the world. And I think about right now, I'm thinking about renting my place. And I'm like, yeah, but if I rent it, what if they break this or this gets ruined and that? And then I have to
Hmm.
think, but what if they're wonderful and great and they take great care of it? Like that's a
Right.
risk. And you just need to make a decision and whatever it will be. And
Hmm.
not think of those negative and think, no, like put out that energy of it will be a great tenant. There will be somebody that's wonderful and that will take care of the place. And because there's lots of things that happen that we can't control.
Yes. Yes. Amen to that. And it's awesome that you mentioned Joe Dispenza, because I do think, sometimes when we think about like Joe Dispenza, or we think about like Esther and Abraham Hicks, there are things that we can sort of get out in front of it. We can start to think about, here's the day that I want to have, here's the week that I want to have, here's the kind of month that I want to have, and really do deliberate creation. At the same time, oh yes, sometimes we get those curveballs and we're like, oh no, this wasn't part of my visualization. Where is this coming from? But at the same time, it's really cool because some of those moments where you're like, oh no, what is this? And we like feel like petulant teenagers. Sometimes those what the heck is this moments, they turn out to actually be something really great because you learn something that you never would have, or you meet somebody that you never would have, and you're like, oh, all right, well, in the moment, I was pretty ticked off and I didn't appreciate this. But now that I've had an opportunity to cool off and see that it brought an awesome person into my life, or I now have a skill that I didn't have before, you can kind of say, all right, well, maybe this was part of the grand plan after all.
Right. Sometimes there are those blessing in disguise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we
Yes.
don't know till after, right? That's the thing. It's like hindsight's great, but when we're in it or we don't see it forward, like we just don't. We can only look back and we don't want to spend too much time looking back, but we do have to very much go with the flow. Sarah, I
Yes.
don't want to take up too much more of your time today, but I just want to briefly talk about you are writing a book right now. Is it done yet, or is you just
It
starting? I know that
is.
we mentioned your book, so I wanted to touch base on that, and then also too, you do some coaching and stuff, and how. First, what type? Talk a little bit about that and how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, awesome. So I have my book is live on Amazon now. It's available in the US and it's on Amazon.com. It's called Decoding the Unicorn, a new look at Dag Hammarskjöld. If you're an introvert, an HSP, a creative, you will definitely feel that this is a kindred spirit, a man after your own heart. Had a wonderful time researching and writing the book. And at the time I thought I'm really doing this favor for Dag and for his legacy because I just care so deeply for him. And I want other people to know what an amazing human being he was and to me still is. And I realized that I was changing too in the process of writing the book and then getting pushed further out of my comfort zone now and in the process of promoting the book and letting other people know about it. So it's been quite a journey. I do work in terms of leadership and development, training, HR, and coaching. You can find my business website, causeyconsultingllc.com. If you want to learn more about the book, you can go to decodingtheunicorn.com or pick it up on Amazon today.
And I will make sure that we have links to everything in the show notes to make it even easier for everybody to connect with you or get your book. So I just want to
Awesome.
say thank you so much for your time today. It was great. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I feel like we could have talked for hours, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. So maybe I'll have you back again another time.
Well, I would love that. You know where to find me, and I can gab for an introvert. I can gab all day. So I appreciate you taking the time as well. It's been a pleasure.